headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Boris is out there talking to NATO. I mean, my question to everyone I ever ask about NATO is what exactly is NATO for? Because they don't seem to do an awful lot.
Well, I think that the conflict in Ukraine has really concentrated minds on the state and purpose of NATO. You're absolutely right that in recent years, the organisation has felt a little bit sort of flat, really. And, I think that there's been a real sense amongst so many NATO member states that they don't really need this thing anymore. And they're rather grudging about having to pay into it. I mean, as you know, and many of your listeners will know, only a handful of the 30 member states have been paying their fair share. It was a big theme of Donald Trump's, who argued very powerfully that it was really not fair that all these member states should expect the protection of the United States and followed by the United Kingdom. In fact, the Baltic states are very good at paying their share. We now know why, without putting their own resources into it. And I think that the actions of President Putin will perhaps lead to a bit of a revival of NATO. It's at a crossroads now, and it needs to rediscover a sense of purpose. And perhaps this is exactly what the organisation needs. Unfortunately, it should be these circumstances.
Yeah, because it seems to become a bit sort of soft and flabby, doesn't it? Because on the day that Russia went into Ukraine, day one, which is now a month ago, I seem to remember the first statement that came out of NATO was, please don't do it, which was kind of pretty wishy-washy, really, wasn't it?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, if you go back to 9/11 and talk to the then NATO Secretary General George Robertson, now Lord Robertson, about how difficult it was to galvanise NATO to take collective action after that atrocity, which killed so many people in the United States. I mean, if ever there were a case of a very obvious attack on a NATO member state, it was 9/11, and it actually was very difficult in the hours and days that followed to agree a collective response. So, since then, fortunately, NATO has not had to agree a collective response in anything like those circumstances. But it needs to now be ready to do so. And I think another question is what now constitutes an attack on one member state? Because under the Article 5, the very important article which gives everybody who belongs to the organisation protection if they are the subject of an armed attack, then that really raises questions about these days, in an age of cyber warfare, in an age of the use of chemical weapons tactically. What is an armed attack? And is that definition rather archaic now for the type of hybrid warfare and the different methods that hostile and rogue nations are using in order to weaken their targets?
Yes, because we're already hearing, aren't we, that Putin in his armoury may have or may wish to use some kind of tactical nuclear weapon or chemical weapon, albeit not exploded over land, possibly exploded over sea, just to sort of threaten everybody with. And it's not clear to me what NATO would do if something like that happened.
Well, I think the short answer is very little. Unless an attack is deemed to have affected directly a NATO member state, the organisation has made it crystal clear that it's not going to get involved. Now, should President Putin's troops tiptoe across the border into Poland, then we will have the real test. Right. And we know that he's pushed his luck a little bit. He's been within 15 kilometres of the Polish border. So that's when the test will come. But I think that there are much more profound issues that go well beyond the current conflict, as I say, to do with the definition of what constitutes an attack on a NATO member state. And by the way, when are all these other countries going to start paying in? Great news that Germany finally is beginning to step up. But there are so many other countries, Italy, Denmark, a long list of them that are way down the bottom of the league table on contributing.
And we don't hear much about what's going on with Germany and Russia vis-à-vis the gas purchasing, because they've been accused in the past of basically paying for Putin's war in Ukraine. I mean, as far as you know, have they now stopped getting gas from Russia, or are they still paying for it?
No, but I'm sure they haven't stopped getting gas from Russia. I mean, the really big concession there by the Germans was saying, look, we're not going to go ahead with this pipeline Nord Stream 2, which is all but ready. An incredibly important project, joint project between the Russians and the Germans. And the Germans have been sort of holding out and trying to kind of hold on to that pipeline for much longer than any of the rest of us would like. I think the real question, though, is how long they will keep that in abeyance, and is this just a kind of short term, okay, we're not doing it now, but we are going to do it later. And you're absolutely right. Those ties between the Russians and very, very senior figures across the political and business world in Germany are profound. The Russians have been working on this for a long time. And I don't think those are going to be unravelled very quickly by any means, or if at all. So it's something that we really need to hold Germany to account on.
Absolutely right. And what about NATO's response vis-a-vis what happened in Belgrade all those years ago when they were authorised to bomb Serbia? That was a very different situation, obviously. But in the same way that the UN somehow got involved in the Balkans War, the UN are not getting involved in this, and NATO would seem reluctant to go anywhere near any kind of prospect of that.
And I think it just raises questions over the point of these, these global organisations. I mean, don't get me started on the UN. What is the point of a UN Permanent Security Council, which has the five permanent members, include China and Russia, both of whom have a veto on everything? Yes. Now, the counter-argument, if you talk to someone like Rory Stewart, very knowledgeable former minister in the government, now out of politics, but does know his stuff, he will argue, well, that's kind of the point of it. You don't just talk to your friends. I can't agree with that, because China and Russia together pose the greatest threat to our ways of life. If they are continually established as permanent members of the UN Security Council with a veto on everything, then basically you're rendering the UN in that capacity completely pointless. And I think it's really time that we looked at this afresh. Yes. And I don't subscribe to the argument, it's all written in legal code and we can't unravel it. Well, I think we're better than that. There must be a way.
There must be. You're quite right. And also, finally, Isabel, the EU has proven itself to be almost completely and utterly irrelevant during this crisis, hasn't it? I mean, it hasn't done anything, isn't able to do anything, doesn't have any kind of military capability. Really, really embarrassing.
Well, I'm glad in a way that they don't have any military capability. I mean, this is something they were trying to do, isn't it, for a long time? And people like you and me were really very suspicious of that. They would have liked to have got us involved in, helping them create an EU army. Can you imagine the absolute shambles that would be? Yeah. So in a way, thank God the EU hasn't got its tentacles over this. As always, they make some virtue signalling noises, but it doesn't translate into much on the ground. And Brexit, I think in this context, we've actually seen that Brexit is a good thing. And the UK has been very much in the lead, I think, on the response. We've been a lot tougher than pretty much everybody else. And I think Zelenskyy's decision to make his address to Westminster before any other parliament shows just what the kind of status that we now enjoy in the minds of the Ukrainians. And of course, that's not going to be limited to the Ukrainians. It's about the UK being back as a player on the international stage. Yes,
absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott, there, journalist, author of White Flag, an examination of the UK's defence capability. Some very interesting points about NATO, what's it for, but more importantly, and possibly even more security-wise importantly, what on earth is the United Nations doing?
Good talk. Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio. Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk radio.